Welcome everyone. I am Madeline Milka, President and CEO of APAICS, the Asian Pacific American Institute for Congressional Studies. Please welcome our wonderful guests today to our Empower Hour. It is a conversation on API first, and we are excited to have you in joining us. So please let me introduce to you our wonderful speakers. Today we have Dr. Suely Saro, who is the first Cambodian American to serve as a council member in the city of Long Beach. Born in a Thai refugee camp to parents who survived the Cambodian genocide, she uses her firsthand immigrant experiences to drive her commitment to fighting for equity. Dr. Saro began her career as a labor organizer, working alongside janitors and healthcare workers for their fight for fair wages and better working conditions. She currently works as a conservancy project development specialist to the San Gabriel and Lower Los Angeles Rivers and Mountains Conservancy, meanwhile serving on the Long Beach City Council. And then we have State Senator Kesha Ram. She is a Vermont state senator, where she is the first woman of color and youngest woman in history to have a seat in the state Senate. Her career in Vermont has spanned preschool education, legal advocacy for victims of domestic violence, and municipal civic engagement. Previously, Senator Ram served in the Vermont House of Representatives. So please, let's give them a warm welcome. So we are so excited to celebrate you and also have you in this conversation. One of the things that we want to remind our viewers today is if they could please put their question in the Q&A. If you're joining us on Facebook, please put them in the comment section. So let's start off with for both of you, what prompted you to enter public service? So Dr. Saro, I'll start with you.
Sure. Entering public service was really just a progression of my purpose and my passion to fight for equity and justice. It was really having the experience of being a young refugee with my parents, where I really had learned service early on by helping my navigating the public school system myself as a young child, to helping my parents navigate social services system and the neighbors. And really, it really went from there in understanding that it's my experience that I really is my purpose, is to help and to improve people's lives. So that's how I got into labor organizing, was because I grew up working in the sweatshop with my father in downtown LA, and then wanting to serve and develop serve the Southeast Asian community by developing the leadership of young women, so that they had the opportunities to go to higher education and also understand how to do civic engagement work. And so then that's kind of where my pathway went on, from kind of grassroots to grass top work, in having then worked for a state senator in his district office, to then running for office. So it's really just driven from the heart and the experience, and now a purpose to serve.
Thank you so much for sharing that. Senator Ram.
Thank you. And, I have to say, when I was not really first elected, but when I kind of started to make national connections, a lot of fellow Asian American legislators said, wait, we have an Asian American woman in Vermont, that's pretty rare, so although my kind of background starts not too dissimilarly from Dr. Saro's, actually in Southern California. I grew up in Santa Monica, and my Jewish American mother met my Indian immigrant father at UCLA. And often that's a story that we can start to just celebrate the melting pot that is, California. But I also like to remind people that it was also the first wave of Asian students who were given visas to study at places like the University of California system or the Ivy Leagues. Before that, it was a lot more rare for Asian students to be able to come over. And so those kinds of cultural exchanges and mixing of communities made my life possible. And my parents, realized that a lot of people in Los Angeles hadn't had Indian food, so it was becoming quite popular. They opened an Irish pub. So they took over an Irish pub in Santa Monica called McGinty's, and they turned it into a fusion food restaurant with the pub part intact. And it was really like nothing else, and similarly to Dr. Saro, just going to work in my family business, which a lot of us in the Asian American community can relate to, probably breaking child labor laws and doing things we weren't supposed to. But it still gave me this deep sense of, watching people build community, watching who is in the in-group and the out-group, going with my father to bring food to people who didn't have any, hiring immigrants and seeing what their experience was like, seeing what my father's life was like as an immigrant, trying to run a business. And in fact, when my parents tried to get the capital to open the business, most banks wouldn't lend to an immigrant or a woman. So they got their restaurant capital from the Women's Bank of Los Angeles. So I really look back on this history of knowing that if programs and policies weren't there to help, level the playing field for them, most of my story wouldn't have been possible. Most of the American dream is built on, the actual breadcrumbs we leave for people so that they know how to actually access it. And it's often elusive for people in our communities. So it's just a triumph to know that we are here. And that's ultimately, I think, like Dr. Saro, why I do what I do, is because for us to be present means, other people can look and say, it's possible for me to serve as well.
Those were just two very impactful stories. So, thank you so much for sharing that with us. When running for office, we sometimes think about what we care about in terms of the issues and how it applies to the office that we'd like to be elected into. So with Councilmember Saro, you are at the City Council. Why particularly the City Council?
What I've learned when I was working for former State Senator Ricardo Lara, who's now the Insurance Commissioner of the State of California, is that I've always, every time people call, it was always about quality of life issues. And sometimes it was about State Department issues that we would serve as a liaison for, right? But really, in the end of the day, I learned that even having served as a city commissioner, it's local officials that impact your day-to-day lives that range, and that makes a huge difference, right? And I also had an opportunity where I thought the person in the seat was leaving after having been in there for 13 years, right? And really felt that my skills, my experience and knowledge, and just also representing Cambodian Americans who've never had a representative could really be the voice and serve the community. And so that is really a lot of the timing around running, the motivation to run, because it's always been for me a progression from working with people as an organizer to then how does policy shape their lives, and then in the end it's like, well, how does local policy impact people's lives, and how do I do it in a way that empowers and really listen to the voice of the community, and that became something that I really felt that I could do and do well.
And Senator, you were in the House in Vermont. So you started in the House and now you're in the Senate. How was your decision-making process and when you first started, and then why you decided to move into the other chamber?
Yeah, one thing that I want our audience to hear is probably where I cut my teeth with student government. I was the student body president at the university, and actually I would joke with people that you represent about as many people as the student body president of the university as you do as a state representative. So, at the time I wasn't quite so cavalier about that. People were the ones telling me, hey, your district is about half young people between 18 and 25. Many need to be registered, but, they really want to be activated and engaged in the policymaking conversations. And so, I started knocking on doors and just knocked on every door in my community twice. I registered over 1,000 students to vote, which is a lot of people in Vermont, I promise. But, I remember at the time I was 22, and it was still rare for someone that young to serve, though not quite as rare in Northern New England, where there's less barriers. We don't have to raise as much money. But, people said, why don't you run for the city council? I said, I don't want to be a city councilor. And definitely no offense to Dr. Saro, in Burlington, that would mean, maybe it's the same in, gigantic Long Beach, but it would mean barking dogs and potholes and stop signs. And I wanted to talk about universal health care and student debt and climate change. And, actually, I would say that was now, 13 years ago, that was 2008. And since then, I think we've seen cities and municipalities become the hotbed of experimentation and the learning laboratories for a lot of those issues. Not to say that they weren't before, but really changes at the federal level that have become very winner takes all, I think mean that people at the local level really have no choice but to be part of that process of helping their local citizenry dream big. And I say that because I went on to work for our mayor in local government while I was serving in the legislature. And they're both incredibly high impact roles, just in very different ways. And I think the biggest issue is at the local level, they we at the state level say, oh, it's the federal government's fault. And then we say, oh, your town can deal with it. At the municipal level, they can't point the finger at anybody else. They have to get it done. They have to pave the roads. They have to take care of people. They have to make the park, and keep it clean. So, I really admire local government, and it wouldn't be possible for us to do what we do at the state level unless we had great partners at the local level. I would just add, we all are feeling the impact of how valuable it is to have partners at the national level, because it's a tremendous, it's been a sea change in terms of our access to vaccines, the money and resources we're getting to stop the bleeding in our communities, quite literally. So, we're very grateful for a federal partner right now as well.
I think we all know how hard it is to be a candidate. It is very much, it's a tax on your emotional well-being, your mental health, your physical health, your families. Everyone wants to sometimes, think about being an elected office as, a position of power, which it is. And at the same time, it takes a lot of work to get into that role. And so, we are about demystifying the process and making government more accessible here at APAICS. And so my question to both of you, what was the most challenging part of being a candidate? Let's start with Councilmember Saro.
Yeah, so I shared earlier that I thought, the seat was going to open when I ran because I have 3 term, but my opponent actually found a loophole and ran for a 4th term. Sorry, my internet is just a little bit unstable, so please be patient with me about that. So I ended up running against a 13-year incumbent who had also lived in the district for 75 years. So, he had a wide variety of connection to people in the city and the political world. And so I actually, but also knew that, I really had believed that I knew the district, I knew the people in the community, and I knew that they were ready for change, right? Because sometimes when you have had somebody in office for a really long time, they get really comfortable, and then we're in a kind of a new time where we've had challenges. We're having a lot of challenges with how to respond to the COVID pandemic. So I really used that opportunity to just change the communication around a vision that everybody could really come together on. And that it became really a really diverse coalition that came around the campaign. And, so I really made it work, but that was the hardest thing, was because people were planning in my head, how could you have the audacity to run against this person? Mm-hmm. Like, who do you think you are? It wasn't like people said it to me, but I could feel they're like, when I said, oh, who I'm running against, they kind of gave me that side eye, like, sure, you're going to lose. And I always said to them, I'm going to win, to let them know that I knew what they were thinking, even if they weren't saying it, because it's a psychological thing. A lot about what's challenging on the campaign, obviously it's raising money. It's having to always kind of be on a job interview every day. But it's really a psychological thing where you have to always remember why you're running, and that you believe that you can win, and you can win because you just know how. I knew how to run a campaign, and I knew the pulse of the community because I was knocking on door and talking to people every day. So that was the biggest challenge. I wouldn't recommend running against an incumbent, but that was my case.
Well, what the councilwoman is saying is totally giving me life. because I also challenged incumbents, and I sort of didn't realize that's what I was doing at first. You know, a bunch of people had encouraged me to run, and they were like, well, it's 2 seats. You're not really running against anybody, you know, but they were both taken seats. So, you know, I learned pretty quickly, oh, I have to account for, like, why me? And, you know, often what I really found is that doing a lot of listening helped. And it probably had a lot to do with who I was running against. You know, they were, we're in Burlington, we're very left and lefter. You know, I was a Democrat. They were running in a third party that's more well known to be aligned with Bernie Sanders. And there had not been a Democrat in my seat in 20 years. And a lot of people who just had a range of political opinions said, you know, I just want someone who listens to me and takes my ideas to the State House. Or even if they didn't articulate it that way, I would knock on doors and just say, how long have you lived here? Oh, what's your son's name? What kind of dog is that? You know, and they would start to talk about dog parks and open space and their child's experience in school and what they wanted out of, you know, policy for their own families. And, you know, I realized I didn't have to give my laundry list of accomplishments to sort of get them to support me. I just had to listen. And, you know, I found that that was just really rewarding as well. And I actually won by the largest margin of any challenger in the state that year at the age of 22. So, you know, it ended up feeling like I had run a much better campaign than I had realized. But, you know, I think what the Councilwoman and I are both saying hopefully really resonates with young Asian American women, because we're often told, don't take risks, don't rock the boat, don't be the one to ask for power, you know, and that couldn't be further from the truth. You know, our communities need us there. It's life or death if they have representation and access to resources and healthcare and all of those things. And so we need to be there, and we can't wait for someone to hand us the baton or act like it's our turn, because they really never will.
And as a person also coming from the sort of the little bit older group, I would also encourage women who might be watching too, who have a different life experience of, you know, working or doing something in the beginning part of their professional career, to also envision themselves as leaders in a different format in an elected position, because you're bringing obviously your lived experience in that arena. And you know, we encourage women of all ages to participate for the sheer fact that we know that you are well accomplished and that you have the ability to serve the community. So, you know, please remember to think of yourself in that way, because we all do. So in regards to, you know, these are your, you know, some of the challenges you faced. What did you see when you were candidates that were encouraging to you, especially being you know, Asian American women? Senator Ram, we'll start with you.
So, you know, I found that there were people in my circle, and right, I'm in Vermont. It competes for the widest state in the country. So, you know, at the time there was this sort of don't play the race card, don't play the gender card. I'm like, well, I don't, you know, I'm 22. I don't know how many cards I have, you know. I'm just trying to, you know, connect with people and see where we can engage and relate. And what I found was, you know, my opponents, I think, you know, similarly to that feeling that the Councilwoman got, my opponents said in the press, we don't even know what she brings to the table. Like, we'd be curious what she thinks that is, because she's so young. And, you know, and then I really got the fire in my belly, because, you know, no one's entitled to those seats, and we all deserve to be heard. I was going to, if I won that race, become the first, you know, woman of color to serve from Burlington, and probably the second woman of color in history in the state. And so, you know, at the time it was complicated to raise that, because the state wasn't really ready to have a conversation about race. But it was also the year that we had President Obama running as a first-time presidential candidate. And, you know, all of a sudden people started to say, you're like our little Obama. You know, you have a father from India and a mother from Illinois, and you have this really interesting story. And I would just found, and, you know, I would say, Madeline, absolutely to your point about older women running, you know, as well. It's, you know, it's one of those things where, you know, being able to see that example and to just know that it's possible was so helpful. And then I got to the legislature and I started to sort of think, oh, I have to like fit in and be effective and make myself smaller. And then the younger women who came along, like the Squad and AOC, sort of reminded me like, wait, you know, that's not my job. Like, I don't have to sort of pretend to be someone I'm not to be effective. In fact, I need to be my authentic self to be effective. So I often say to people, I feel like I'm getting courage from women and just people younger than me. Gen Z is like out for us, you know, and as they should be. So, you know, I often feel like, hey, you know, if I can help women who are even older than me think, hey, you're doubting yourself, you know, and you really shouldn't. We all need to offer that to each other, because we can really forget. And frankly, you know, just to generalize once more, men don't tend to do that. You know, they don't tend to say, I'm too young, I'm too old, I have too many obligations, I don't have enough on my resume. They just do it, you know, and I'm constantly trying to encourage women of all ages in my life to just go for it. There's, you know, people will decide, but you know, the more you consider what you do have as an asset and not a liability, the better off we all are.
Well said, Senator. How about you, Councilmember?
You know, I definitely want to build on what Senator Ram said about how you really just don't need permission. And I think that that's kind of what we've been taught in our culture, to just being a woman, is waiting for permission or waiting for your turn or waiting until you're ready, whatever that means, right? It really means that you just got to take that first step, for me, in terms of being ready. And I think making sure you have your core supporter that's going to be there and that's ready to, you know, walk with you. I think for me, because, you know, not only was I running against a man who has been there for a long time, but I also had to deal with the Cambodian community, the men who are leaders in the community, where, you know, it was really, you know, mostly male, talking about running and who should run. And I wasn't initially part of that conversation, and he was even aware. I was too busy planning how I was going to make my announcement or how I was going to fundraise, right? So while I didn't have those core supporter on in the beginning, I eventually did it one by one. I think just having had the skill as an organizer is that it's really communicating to people not only about your ability, but a vision that you know that they want to see happen too, and really moving on that. And that's how I was able to build a multiracial, you know, campaign, and where it wasn't just Cambodians, it was, you know, African Americans and Latino. We have a very diverse district of, you know, 50,000 people in this district. And that was really what was great about the campaign was, you know, I think in our mind, we always think, okay, who's going to support me is who you know now. But I built so many relationships with people in the year or 2 year I was campaigning, which is mostly fundraising, was really knowing who knows who. And I found out too, unfortunately, which many other electeds have shared, is that those who are sometimes, you know, the most or longest aren't always there for you when you need them. And so that's why I think it's really important that it really does take everyone who does that you build a relationship with to be part of your team and really build on that core kind of momentum, and really not having time to feel sad. You know, I do, you know, we go through all the emotions that comes with a challenge of a campaign. But what I've learned, I think, just being as a refugee is you dust yourself off of it and you pick yourself back up, you know, and you don't let that really just keep you off too much. But it's a lesson learned, right? So everyone became just a support. Everyone I talked to, it wasn't just one person, and that's what gave me life and kept me going on a really hard campaign. So that was really, I think, what is encouraging for me, and I think many others too, when you find out, when you campaign and talk to people, how inspiring it is for people that you are taking this chance to make change.
You know, one of the things that I've learned in my years of having worked in campaigns is that candidates can find themselves very lonely. It's a very people person, you know, outwardly facing job. Even as when you become an elected official, you're always around people. People are always interested in talking with you. And at the same time, it can be very lonely because you find that, you know, ultimately as a decision maker, you have to, you make these decisions and you have to be able to live with them knowing that that was your decision. And so, kitchen cabinets and, a close knit group of people, I find are very helpful in being able to let your guard down, being able to share your vulnerabilities so that you have the space to, think through some of your decisions as well. Trusted advisors who, are there to support you and, are not there with a different type of an agenda. So, this next question really is, who helped to mentor you, to give you that confidence and also to help you during those times of, those vulnerable moments? So I'll start with the council member.
And I really just, it's never really been one person. I think just having grown up not kind of being on my own in the sense emotionally and I think mentally, I was always seeking, having a bunch of people I had in my network that depending on what I was questioning or what I was feeling at that moment, I would think about who would be the best person I could talk to or get ideas from. And really who is really also going to give me some comfort, really not ideas, right? Because I think that what I've learned is everyone responds to you in the way you ask for help a certain way. So I learned that if you're really clear about what you're asking for and what you're seeking from people, oftentimes that's what you get. And I think sometimes as somebody who had to reach out to a lot of people, I learned very early on that not everybody can be that one person for you, even your spouse, right? And sometimes you don't want to affect your personal relationship sometimes too much with kind of political stuff, right? Like I have friends I don't talk about political stuff. They're just my friends. So I think that's kind of where I really learn how to survive and just stay mentally well. And then sometimes at the end of the day, I just don't want to talk to anyone. I just need to process it for myself to figure out what the heck just happened and and why am I upset about this, right? And so a lot of it is just taking that time in the moment and then realizing, okay, I really need to talk to X, Y, and Z. So I have to say that's just been my experience because I didn't grow up having that one person, which I wish I did, but I didn't.
Senator?
Yeah, I mean, I think a big takeaway from what the councilwoman just said is that it's going to be really different for everyone, and it often depends on where you are on the introvert extrovert spectrum, like what really gives you life, because I am an extreme extrovert. I mean, just like to a fault. And I think at some point I thought, oh, let me like have an introvert partner, be around people who, balance me out. But really, I need a lot of external validation to keep going. I call them the people who believe more in me than I believe in myself. And, I count my dog in that group. There's just a lot of support you need because it helps to balance a lot of the vitriol. And I think someone started to ask, have you faced additional barriers with your identity, et cetera? I mean, it is not easy to be a woman in politics, to be an Asian American woman in politics, to be, in my case, in such a white state where there's fewer people who sort of understand the unique challenges I face. When often people don't know what I am because I'm a Hindu. So, it's even more complicated. And then, they'll sort of, once they find out, oh, she talked about India, she's Indian, then I get a barrage of like, go back to India messages, from people who may or may not even live in the state. But, all of that means that you have to have people around you who remind you why you're doing this and who really deeply believe in you. And, my partner has been that for me too. We're getting married in August. And I thought, I need someone to, take me down a peg and like, tell me that I'm not that important. But I'm like, no, sometimes I need someone who's like just totally in my corner when I get done with the day, just really, really believes that I'm good at what I do, wants to watch me give speeches. I sound super full of myself, but, I think it's just knowing yourself and saying, no, I want someone who doesn't talk with me about politics, or I want someone who comes with me to things. But I also can, I had a partner of 11 years and it didn't work out. And I think this is important for women to talk about. And, it was kind of like, oh, do I have to come to the event? Are you giving a speech? Do I still have to come? Are you getting an award? It was like, didn't want to come. And I thought that's really cute, and at the end of the day, it just didn't work out because we both were just different. And so it's kind of knowing your love language with your friendships, your family, your partner, pets, you know, it's like you really need to know, do I need support or do I need people to leave me alone? And that's really different for everybody in this really tough job.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it's so important too to recognize that, you know, as Asian American women, you know, we have stereotypes put upon us oftentimes, you know, misconceptions, biases, you know, think some people think we're docile. Some people might take us down to like the tiger mom level. Some people might think that we have, you know, tendencies that are completely not our own, you know, doesn't really mesh with our own personalities. So, and being in such public figures in such high, you know, profile positions, you know, you do have to sometimes have that external exterior that is meant for the people who you are working for, because they are your constituents, they're your voters. You need to be able to convey to them how you are providing solutions. And then there are just times when you just need a moment to say, like, this is who I am, just a regular person. I'm just like you anyway. I just have to do these different things. And so, you know, I always find it interesting whenever people talk about, you know, their support system and how they recharge and how they find the energy to keep going. Because oftentimes, you know, it's, you know, people want to say that it's a glamorous life. And I remind them, this is not Scandal. This is not the West Wing. This is about, you know, really, you know, providing solutions. And, you know, the thing is, with being an elected official or, you know, in public office, people come to you with problems, you know, and they don't come to you with, hey, I got a solution. They come to you with problems, looking for ways to find a solution. And so that does tear at you oftentimes, because you can't help everyone all the time at exactly the same time. So prioritizing how you're going to manage your time, as well as, you know, how do you take care of yourself? So, you know, I appreciate both of you and you sharing how you're able to, you know, find that support system for yourselves.
If I just wanted to add one thing, you know, because I imagine the councilwoman would agree. It can also be complete strangers, you know, and often I am totally recharged when a young person comes up to me and says, it's so amazing to watch what you do. I'm a huge fan. Especially, you know, sometimes it really hits me. Someone will say, when you were student body president, you were the first Asian American person I saw in a leadership role. And I'm like, oh my gosh, that makes sense. You know, wow, that's really a lot to carry, but it gives you enough energy to go for the rest of the week, you know? And like you said, there's people who can not be friendly and can, you know, I once got yelled at in the coats area after a funeral, and this other woman getting her coat was like, I just want to stay with you for a second and make sure you're okay. You know, I got yelled at about like a policy issue. And so people don't give you much peace, you know, not at a restaurant, not at a funeral, not anywhere. So the people who kind of just kindly come up to you and say, when they hand you the check as the waitress, I really admire you. You know, I'm good for like the rest of the month. People can yell at me all they want. So, you know, if you are watching and you think, I don't know how to approach someone in leadership, you know, start by just saying, I see what you do. And it really changes everything.
So for both of you, what advice do you have for Asian American women to make that deciding factor to run for office? Council member?
You know, I really think it needs to be from a place of purpose. I think that as much as it's been an honor to be the first Cambodian American, I really never thought about that while I was campaigning, because I was so stuck on just the personal stories that people shared about their problems, right? The issues that they're facing. And for me, it's really, that impacts their whole being. And I think that it's really knowing that I empathize with everybody, but not that I feel like I'm taking this weight on. I think maybe it's something I've just learned to do in having been in a community that's been traumatized by genocide. It's not so much that I have to take all of this problem and weight into my heart and shoulder, but that I hear it and I'm holding it. And I think that that's really what people want in the end of the day. I think, having even worked for a state senator, talking to constituents, they just want to be heard. And I think having their solutions solved would be nice, but I don't think that they always expect it be solved right away. And I feel that that's really what moves people to then build relationship with you, because connections are so important to me. And I think that that's really, when you're in office, it's really about relationships in the end of the day, in fundraising, in how you work with your constituents, your colleagues. And I think it's really thinking about how do you want to approach it from a humanity standpoint. I think we get caught up in the day-to-day politics and the protecting of ourselves or who we're serving. But I think it's being really clear that you're doing it for a reason that is very much about creating what you're offering and serving to the community is what feels really right for you, and being really centered on that. And so I think that anyone running for office should really think about why you're running for that office, and how is that part of who you are, because it's not just a hat you wear on and you take off at the end of the day. While I'm a mom with my mom at the at the park with my kids, I'm thinking, wow, the bathroom is terrible. What about other moms? I couldn't bring my child into the stall. It's just, not very sanitary or things like that, right? So it's just part of who I am, and I feel that that's why people need to be clear when they're running for office. It's not about anything else for me outside of serving, and how do I bring my solutions to the table to creating change and inspiring the next generation as well to take leadership, because I feel that that's the way we've made changes, with students taking charge in issues to leading the way. And so that would be my advice.
Yeah, I think what the councilwoman kind of inspired me to say is that, and especially from her work helping people organize who are in jobs that are far less glamorous or they get less thanks, is that, like, I'm in awe of the barista at the local coffee shop. I think there are people who do really hard jobs, and our role isn't to sort of lord above people and like wave a wand and make their lives better. It's to see them and recognize that they're doing really hard work in their communities, and they don't often get the credit for that. What we do isn't necessarily harder just because it's more visible. It's hard in different ways, but people do really incredible jobs all the time, and we need them to be able to feel successful and have dignity doing whatever they're doing. So I would say, if you try to decide if you want to run for office, you really have to love the job too, and want to do an excellent job serving people. And I think we can all say, like, it just makes things harder, but everyone in every role has to set boundaries. My fiance will, like, take my phone and put it in the couch cushion and be like, we're not doing that anymore. But you could do that if you were on Wall Street, or you were an assistant to a major executive. Everyone can sort of get attached to their job and feel like it's 24 hours. So I think part of what you need to do is put it in perspective. Everyone's doing important work. How can you add value in the role, not sort of make yourself feel more valuable? And so, I think if you go in with that attitude, you won't crumble as much when people attack you, because they will, but you can say, I know why I'm doing this job and I'm good at it, as opposed to saying, like, I need validation, like I said, was important to me, but you can get through the mean tweets if you know what you're doing and why you're doing it.
So Councilwoman, can you speak a little bit to what resources you found were helpful to you when you were running for office?
Yeah, I mean, I took advantage of as many as I could, and obviously APAICS, provided training, APAICS, so, excuse me. And so, leadership training on running for office. And so, and as well as other training that I was able to find in my local area as well. And, the other thing that I would share is really, if you're thinking about running for an office, is to talk to people who've been in those roles and what it was like for them, and why they did it, just to understand and kind of build a kind of network of people who've been in these roles, that you can kind of just learn from them. Not necessarily that it'll be the same experience, but something that you can customize that fit for you. And also just talking to people in the surrounding network community. There's always that usual player that you always hear about, that you can talk to get their thoughts on things. I think it's just really important that you also just build and strengthen the network you have, because that's really who you're going to go to ask for money, to fundraise, and also maybe to volunteer as well. And also just if you're looking for, you know, some campaigns, you need staff, you need people who's going to be helping you to fundraise, and who also is going to help you, you know, find political consultants. So it's good to just be in that kind of network to see who's the best or who could work for you, to best guide you and navigate through just the process. So that's kind of how I did it. But that's, again, not what would work for everyone. And you know, everyone has different kind of resource at hand.
Senator Ram, I have a question for you specifically, because one of the things that we try to encourage at APAICS is to run for office, even if you don't have a lot of the Asian Americans in your district. And so your district, I think, is 90% white. In your experience, you know, what do you think made it a winning campaign for you as a woman of color?
Yeah, so our state is 94% white, and our county, I represent the largest county in the state, and it's a little bit more diverse than that, probably 92% white instead, and a very a robust growing population of people of color, and particularly new Americans. And so for a state that is sort of this homogenous, there is a lot of attention that's being paid to racial justice and to understanding that the more we center people at the margins, the more we are all better off. And so I've been able to really make the case, you know, one of your 150 House seats or one of your 30 Senate seats, wouldn't it be great if it's someone who can build bridges to make sure that people don't get left behind from these communities? And not that other senators don't do that, but I often say, you know, you can't fit your lived experience into a 3-minute, you know, offering of testimony at a hearing. You can't explain what it is like to be the child of immigrants or to be a person of color dealing with the police, you know, in 5 minutes to a committee. If you don't have anybody on that committee who has the lived experience of being a person of color, that's really challenging. To sort of then be able to be a representative democracy. And so, you know, there's multiple ways that I make the case. In fact, we're an aging state, and 90% of our population growth over the last decade has come from the in-migration of people of color. So we constantly talk about, you know, how are we going to grow as a state? Where is the future workforce? Where are the future young people in our schools? And they are looking increasingly diverse. Whereas, you know, 3% of our older population are people of color, it's 10% of our students. So there is this growing change that's coming. We're finally catching up to the rest of the country in Vermont. And you need to have bridge builders and cultural brokers to sort of make sure that you don't create a generation of people who feel less than, who feel othered, who feel criminalized. So often I probably, you know, what I try to do is not try and speak for every community of color in the state, but make sure that we engage in our work as a democracy and as a legislature in a way that they can be heard, that they're part of hearings where they feel safe, and that, you know, as we start to diversify who we hear from, you hear people say, do you really believe institutional racism exists? Well, you pulled yourself up by your bootstraps, you know, do you really think these people can't do more to help themselves? And you know, so the more we are engaged in the work of racial justice in Vermont, the more people are turning to me and saying, I don't think we're doing a good job, you know, let's do better. And that's a really critical role. I can't do it by myself. I'm constantly encouraging other BIPOC folks to run. And in fact, we just started an institute in our state named for the first Black woman to ever serve in the legislature in the 90s. It's called the Bright Leadership Institute. It was Representative Luvenia Dorsey Bright. And we've created an institute to help people of color in our state find each other, support each other, and run for office. And, you know, we're going it alone here in Vermont, but we know that, you know, we have work to do as a very white rural state, and we have a lot of allies to do that work.
That's terrific. That's wonderful to know. You know, one of the things that we are, you know, trying to address now, especially with the rise of anti-Asian hate and violence, is, you know, communicating a message to others out there in the general public about the priorities that the community may have. What do you see are the priorities for your constituents in respect to the Asian American experience in your districts?
I think that, that's part of why I ran for office, is that, this district has, the 6th district, which I represent, has the highest rates of disparities that range from just unemployment to the high rising rates of violence that's been happening, gun violence, unfortunately, to unemployment rate, poverty rates, and health disparities. And so this is still I ran wanting to work on that, and it's still something I want to work on. And it's certainly been exacerbated with COVID, because we also have had the highest COVID rates as well. And so when and so more recently in just what's been happening with all of these anti-hate harassment and rhetoric, is I had introduced an item last week on Tuesday Council to have the city draft up a resolution to condemn it. And just from a chilling coincidence that happened was just an hour before I was going to present on the item, I had received a call from the chief of police that there was that mass shooting that happened in Atlanta. I was just shaken by it. And when I spoke on it, it was just really just very sad that this is happening. And I just couldn't believe it. I was just about to do this item. And it really resonated with the people in Long Beach. I'm like the 3rd Asian American on city council for the city. And so they haven't really had a representative that's just Asian in general that really was out there providing leadership, I think, on the community's issue as well. So we did a visual that brought people out on short notice. And I think that it's really ensuring that there's inclusion of Asian Pacific Islander in the conversation and discourse of many things in the city. And so that's kind of, for me, carrying forward. Also, we have a large Pacific Islander community in the city as well. Making sure that, I'm intentionally inclusive when I talk about the community in various settings around economics to health issues, and that they're always at the forefront, and lifting that up as an issue that everyone should also care about, because we also have, out of kind of about 500,000 people in the city, about 13% are Asian Pacific Islander. And yet at the same time, I'm hearing that there was no incident of report made to the police in the last year since the pandemic has occurred of any incident from an Asian person. Now, I don't know about you, but I don't believe that there's nothing that's been going on. So currently working to figure out how do we work together between various nonprofits to the city programs to PD. How do we ensure the community feels safe and supported, and ensure that it's very serious that they do report it. So that's kind of the ongoing work at the moment that I'm working on with our community groups in the city.
Yeah, so actually one of the first times I realized how important it is to think about, which communities are affected by what. I was working with the Coalition for Clean Air in Los Angeles as a high school intern, and we were talking about dry cleaning regulation. And my supervisor said, I need you to start to help me collect a lot of information and organizational contacts in the Korean American community, because they own about 2/3 of all the dry cleaning establishments in Los Angeles. And I thought, oh my gosh, okay, yeah, wow. And it was the first time I realized, that you really have to develop policy solutions that don't leave huge populations behind that are often rendered invisible, and you have to think specifically about their needs. And, I think this is sort of a congressional study, so I'll try to share some big picture thinking too. In 2016, what I really felt like happened that is where Democrats went wrong is it was, oh, if you're Black, you care about policing. If you're Latinx, you care about immigration. If you're Asian, you care about education. And it was very pigeonholing for a lot of our communities. When we're non-monolithic, we're incredibly diverse in our needs and our thinking. And, we had a lot of work to do to not just to actually create a value proposition to a lot of these different communities. And that starts with listening and understanding their needs. And so I have often just gone into those communities in Vermont. We have larger proportions from our refugee resettlement program of Bhutanese, Nepali folks in our state and Somali Bantu folks. And, you have to know that a Somali person and a Somali Bantu person probably aren't going to be able to sort of get along in the same space if there's a power imbalance in who's sort of has power over who in like a housing situation. Or, for the Bhutanese Nepali community, they had a real desire to have a Hindu temple. And I was trying to work with the Indian community at the same time, but there was a lot of really different needs around what that would look like. And for the Bhutanese Nepali community, it was like a permanent community center too. It wasn't just like where they wanted to go to have prayers said or something. And so, it's often the cultural humility part is not just that we sort of know these communities, it's that we stay curious about their ongoing and evolving needs and the generational differences, and how to sort of maybe even detect things like mental health issues, that are often undetected by our kind of white, the healthcare system that was built around white culture. So you have to constantly be uncovering layers of, understanding human behavior, different communities, the cultures that they've come from, and what that means for how you make sure they're woven into the policy decision-making process as well. I think often what's so critical is that we just don't get fatigued. That's, I think, the kind of cycle of white fragility that I'm constantly talking about in my work, is to say, this is all too much. I understood the food and the fabric stuff, and the rest of it is too complicated for me. We need people to get past that point, but we as, communities of color as well, also need to do that work, to say, it's never too much. We have to keep understanding so that people can trust us, that we're really leading with them in mind.
Thank you for sharing that. It's hard to believe that this hour is almost up, and we only have a few minutes left. We were able to incorporate some of the questions that were from the audience into the questions that we relayed today. So, as we close, I really would like to hear from you what you would like to share to AAPI women who want to run for office, your number one tip for them. So, Council Member, we'll start with you.
Oh, well, as far as number one tip, if you're thinking about it, really just explore it. Don't go into kind of this maze of self-doubt. Should I do it or not? Just look into it, and just figure out what does that mean for yourself and what does it mean for you. If you're on this Zoom listening, it's probably because you are thinking about it. So really just look up the position. What does it take? When are the terms up? What does it mean to be in that role, and reach out to those who are in those roles, whether they're Asian American or not, right? Maybe other women who have similar barriers that you might have that you're concerned about.
Yeah, just really want to thank the Councilwoman for all her great work, and I'm going to find her on Twitter too, and look forward to watching what she does. We really have to lift each other up as we rise, so that's exceptionally critical. I would just also say there are people who've created kingdoms out of like a parking commission, or like a library study or something. So really try to like don't wait. Even if you think you want to run for Congress, go listen to a dog park meeting, because they're intense. So there's no level of government that's easy. There's no level of government that's boring. And often, people will say, oh, well, young people might be bored about our agenda. I'm like, well, this guy's asleep, so they can't do much worse than that. And you can go on a board or commission or get involved in a local effort and shape it and shape the direction of it and totally change it. So when I was in college, I was on the mayor's environmental commission and, started to bend the conversation a lot more toward justice. Otherwise, it was a very gourmet conversation, mostly about or, kind of organic conversation, gourmet conversation, as I would call it, electric vehicles and, you know, they're important. But at the time it was like, that's so far away from the reality of people who have lead in their soil, who have lead on their windowsills, who don't speak English and don't have the environmental information they need. So there's always a way to, you know, connect any study or any commission to the things you care about. And it takes dedication, and then you'll learn a lot. And from there, I mean, you know, Howard Dean, one of our more famous Vermonters, would always say, you know, if you've worked in local government, you can be president. I mean, you know, once you understand the ups and downs, the way things live and die in the smallest form of the smallest unit of government, you understand what it takes. You understand that we take everything very seriously as citizens and Americans and residents of communities. And that's part of what strengthens us as a country. You know, and finally, I would just say that I think so much of what it means in many ways to be Asian American too, or just to have immigrant parents, is we often think, you know, oh, they wanted us to like strike it rich and be, you know, the most famous lawyer or engineer or doctor, but they probably just wanted us to live in a community where we could talk to someone we really disagree with and nobody would die over that. You know, nobody would lose their farm or their job or what they needed to live, you know, that we could just resolve our differences and be part of problem solving in our communities. I think that's a huge part of who we are as Asian Americans. And so, you know, I think we're our ancestors' wildest dreams just by engaging in our local democracies.
Yeah, and I also want to thank Madeline for your leadership at APAICS. It's just been really crucial in helping us ensure that local leaders get the resources and training, and the ongoing online panels that are done to the conferences are really crucial. And I just want to thank you so much for your hard work. I know it's hard leading an organization.
Well, thank you so much. I really greatly appreciate your kind words. It is a labor of love for me to do this. It's, you know, I love seeing women who look like all of us out there representing, being in leadership roles, and you both are both very inspirational. And I hope the folks who have been watching today take your words of advice. To that extent also, we have a new program at APAICS called Office Hours. It was created so that we can mentor rising AAPI women who are interested in running for elected office. So if you go onto our website at apaics.org and enter into the program section, you'll see the Women's Collective, and that will pop down and you'll see in the program section office hours. And so our first series will start on in April. We were going to share how to deal with sexism on the campaign. And so it will be a presentation from the Barbara Lee Family Foundation and conversation with former candidate Pearl Kim. So we look forward to seeing everyone sign up for that. We really think it's an important work in terms of making some advice available to API women who are interested in taking the step. So thank you to both of you for doing that. We look forward to seeing your success in your progress. And thank you for being such inspirational role models. Join us the next time.
Great.